Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for another episode of Studio Time with Junkie XL. I'm Tom, Junkie XL, and today I want to focus on a group of synthesizers that is really amazing, and they've changed the world musically over multiple film scores, like for instance Blade Runner. And they've contributed so much to the music in the 70s and the 80s and way after that, because these synthesizers are very sought after, and a lot of bands use them nowadays in their productions, and they really stand out because they have a really unique sound to them. And I'm talking about the Yamaha CS synthesizers. So the smallest one is a CS10, then you have a 15D, then you have a CS20, a CS40, and then you have a CS50, a CS60, a CS70M, and a CS80, which is a really big beast. Except for two, I have all of them. Unfortunately, two of them are in repair. They're a little sick, so they had to go back to the doctor, which is unfortunately, it's the CS70M, which is the biggest one in that series, and the CS60, which is the more organ-looking type synth. But I'll promise you, when they get back and when they're better and they're feeling better, I'm gonna do another tutorial on those two. But let's start with the CS15D that I have right here in front of me. So this synthesizer is a little bit similar to some of the other synthesizers that I have mentioned before in other tutorials, where they were making a transition from being an organ synthesizer, organ keyboard, towards a more mature synthesizer. So the first that came out, the 15D, is actually, on one hand, it's still a preset synthesizer with a thing like a clarinet, a flute, a trombone, a cello, clavinet, xylophone, and then you also have a synthesizer section that you can use as a lead or something, that we'll get into in a little bit. The funny thing is though, the synthesizer that you can program yourself pretty much covers all the presets that are there, so they did that actually pretty well. Now, if you do select a preset, all these knobs here will actually not work on the preset. Therefore, they have a couple of controllers here, octave up and down, a modulation wheel that can go to the filter or to the VCO or to the envelope. And you can control the sustain, longer, shorter, and you have brilliance, which is basically controlling the filter. And it's actually pretty amazing how much variety you can get out of that with just a couple of these parameters. So let's just go through a few of these presets. The first one is a clarinet that sounds like this. Let's go to the flute. Now the flute sounds especially beautiful, and it really reminds me of the old Blade Runner score. Very nice clear sound, except for that little crack that is in the volume part. Needs a little bit of fixing too. Let's play the trombone. The tuba. The trumpet. The violin. Xylophone. Okay, so those are the presets, and it has a really nice sound, and it's great for solo melodies because it's not a polyphonic synthesizer, it's a monophonic synthesizer. But if I move this slider from channel 1 to channel 2, now I can access the synthesizer, and obviously later I can mix the two signals together. So now I'm set to manual, and now that gives me the option to program the synthesizer. Really big fat sound that comes out of this thing. It's great for bass lines, great for leads, and I use it a lot for that. And this was actually one of the synths that I used to emulate the 303 made by Roland back in the day. I was not able to afford the 303, but I was able to get very cheap this keyboard. So this was the one that is perfect to emulate that. Just to go over the synthesizer, it's very simple in setup. So you can choose how low or high your keyboard note is. Then you could say, do you want a saw wave, or a pulse, or something in between? Then there's a noise mixer that allows you to add noise to the signal. When we get to the filter section, we have the cutoff frequency and resonance. And we have the envelope depth. So if it's set to maximum, I can make really percussive sounds with the ADSR. And then we have the VCA that controls the overall volume of the synths. Or the other way around. The CS15D. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sounding synth. Okay, let's move on. Let's come over here. And here, in the CS series, we jump to the 40M. Later inside, I will show you the 20M. But the 40M is obviously the bigger version of the 20M. So this one has two VCOs. Not only that, it is also two-voice polyphonic instead of one. And it has the opportunity to store presets in here. And you've got 1 to 10 and 11 to 20. This synth, like the 15D that we just played, when you select a preset, all these knobs here will stop working, and you only have at your disposal the controller section that I just talked about. Something similar. You have portamento, you have brilliance, you have different sustain. You can play with the pitch, and you can play with modulation, and then route that to different elements of the synth. Let me just quickly play this synth. Again, a beast of a sound, beast of a sound. Now, for instance, if I want to write this preset, because I like the sound so much, I just hit write, and then boom, I hit one, and boom, it's now there. And like I just explained, now all these controllers will not work anymore because it's a preset. So in order to access those parameters to a certain extent is the knob that I have here, Brilliance. And with sustain long, I can make the note long again. So when you press panel, that's when you program the synth. When you're done programming it, you store it in one of your memories. Now there's a very interesting feature that this synthesizer has. Actually, there's so many. Let me just start right at the beginning because it makes way more sense. I'm just gonna make sure that we're just listening to one oscillator. The filter is open. VCO2 is down, noise is down, off, 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 off. If correct, yes, we're just listening to one wave. I'm just going to turn the volume a little bit down so I can also talk over it and it won't be too much of a hassle. So if we look at the VCO right here, we have an option of a sine wave, a saw wave, a pulse wave. Right underneath we have pulse width. Where we can control that width. Right next to it we have a switch that basically says, do you want to modulate the pulse? So now modulating it with an LFO, or do you want to use the EG that we have right here? So the EG will now modulate the pulse width. And you can pick, if you want, the negative EG. So basically it's going to flip the EG around and you get that sound. So let's pick a saw wave right here. Obviously also here you can choose the range in which you're programming your sound. So you have all ways of frequency spectrum to go for. So I can also modulate the pitch of the note with this little section here, and I have a lot of different options to choose from. So I can choose a saw wave. Sorry, that was a sine wave. Sorry about that. The saw wave. Reverse saw. I can choose pulse. Sample and hold. I can also use the ADSR. And that doesn't seem to work. And that is something that the doctor needs to fix. Every time when I play with one of my synths, I find something that is not working. But the doctor will fix that. Let's now move over to the second VCO. So I'm just going to turn the first VCO off and the second one goes on. Now this VCO is more or less identical to this VCO. So I'm just going to go through this a little quicker. It has pitch, the different waveforms. I can have my modulation for the pulse width, and again I also can modulate here. Similar functions as the first VCO. Now, let's see. Oh, wait a second. My mistake. There's no doctor needed for this function. I fucked it up here. So actually, when you select EG, there's this little section here that will control the EG. I just blanked for a second there. So if I set it to EG plus, so with that little section, you can control the EG, whether you want to do it like that or you want to bend into it. Okay, so I'm just going to switch these off. I'm going to go to my lower setting. Now I'm going to switch the first VCO on as well. And now we hear them both at the same time. And I'm going to play with the detuning a little bit to make the sound a little fatter. Really nice thick saw sound. So we go to the next section over here, and this is the ring modulator. So now I can switch the ring modulator on, and then I'll play a little bit with the ring modulation, and then you can hear how that sounds. Very good sounding ring modulator. Okay, so they're both on. Also, this synth, like the other synth, has the noise that I can add to it. Then we get to the filter. Filter, very basic in setup, nothing too complicated. I can choose between a low pass filter, resonance. I can choose a high pass filter. And a band pass. Okay, so let's go back to the low pass. It has its own ADSR here, so no ADSR applied. A little more. And then I have also an option to modulate the filter with an LFO. So this is actually a way to create really cool rhythms if you take the saw wave, because it has a hard attack. That's the filter, beautiful sounding filter. Now we get to the mixer, and this is where it gets interesting. This is very unique to the Yamaha synths, where at the very end, when you already had your oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, you now can add a sine wave that will pitch with the note that you're playing. So if I take these oscillators out, we hear nothing. So here, I can add a sine wave and a second one. And the second one is connected to VCO2, and the first one is connected to VCO1. So if you do any detuning here on the pitch, that will result in the detuning in the sine waves here too. But this way you can create really, really deep basses. People who play this at home at a good stereo, you will definitely hear it. So now I'm going to take the waves out. It's still big, but now they're back in. Absolutely wonderful box. And I hadn't shown you yet is that it is polyphonic. You can play two notes at the same time. And another function that this synthesizer has, and that's the last thing I will say about this, is the function that we've seen in some of the other synthesizers that were polyphonic, which is unisono. So both oscillators and the two voices are now combined into one, resulting in a more fatter sound. So let me play that. That's without. That is with. Off. The CS40M, absolutely beautiful machine and a go-to machine for a lot of projects that I work on. And now we go inside and I'm going to show you some more CS synthesizers. Okay, we're inside in my home studio and this is the Yamaha CS20M. And the CS20M is pretty much half of the 40M. A lot of things are the same. The sound quality is more or less the same. And it has a smaller preset panel, whereas the 40M has twice as much. So I'm just going to go quickly through a couple of presets that I threw in here. And the same as with the 40M, when you're in panel mode, that's when you can actually program the synth. In any of the other modes, these will be disabled and you have your little controller section here to do the performance. So let's go to the panel. Kind of like a Moog bass going on. Great synthesizer for basses, leads, experimental sounds. Really, really great. I've used it a lot. Now, the last synth in the series I would like to play to you is the CS30M, which is so funny because it looks completely different than any of the other synths that we have seen so far. Completely different design. And the way that this synthesizer is set up is really mind-boggling. Maybe the start of Yamaha making things overly complicated where it technically shouldn't. But nevertheless, it's a great sounding synth. So what's really interesting with this synth is that you have two VCOs and you got two filters. Now, instead of pretty much every synth that's out there, if you select VSO1, so let's do that now at this point, and I'm just going to take the other one out. And we hear it on just one side of the speaker because the other VCO is going to the other side. Normally you would choose in your VCO what wave you want to be selecting, whether it's like a pulse wave or a saw wave. So what Yamaha has done here is that you have two VCOs that you can tune. But then if you go to filter 1, that's when you can say what wave it actually is. So filter 1 can listen to the saw wave of VCO1, it can listen to the pulse wave of VCO1, and then below you could also add VCO2 to the same filter. And then when you go to the second filter, you have a similar setup. You could say, I want the filter from VCA, I want filter 1, but now it's a high pass. Or I want to choose the saw wave from VCO2. So there's this really complicated way of routing stuff. And when you go to the VCA, again, you could mix different things into one VCA1 and different things into VCA2. So a traditional synthesizer would actually have VCO1, you select your waveform, it goes into the filter, you do your filter settings, and then it goes to a VCA with an ADSR attached to it, which is the normal way of pretty much every synth. Not with this synth. So you have two VCOs where you do your basic settings, and then in the two filters you can do really complicated routing and selecting to select what goes into this filter. So filter 1 can have both VCOs in it or just one. Filter 2 can have both VCOs in it or just one. And to make it even more exotic, you could also choose external input, which means that you can put a microphone in or a guitar or a different synthesizer or a drum loop or whatever you want to put in there. The synthesizer itself as a sound is pretty much developed to make bass sounds and lead sounds. So I have a filters, I've got a bass sound set up right there, right here. And as you can hear, I can individually now control the filter of VCA1 that goes to the left and filter 2 that goes to VCO2 that goes to the right. So you hear those on both different things. It's a really nice, good sounding synth. Now another really great feature that this synth has is it has 3 ADSRs and you can pick wherever they're going to go to. So every oscillator, every filter has at a certain point a section that asks you to what ADSR am I supposed to be listening to. So if we look here, the depth of the filter pitch could be either A, it could be B, C, D, or E. And you see the filters like, you see the ADSRs like right here. Now, the other thing that's really interesting is that you can switch the keyboard on and off for the individual VCOs. Not that you lose it, but one of them can actually go to a sequencer right here. And the same goes for the ADSRs. I'm 100% sure that, you know, what I'm trying to explain here is not necessarily synthesizer for beginners, because there's actually some novice, some novel stuff going on here. But let me now switch to the sequencer on all these puppies right here. Here, and then that goes to keyboard. And now I can start the sequencer. Got to turn down the volume a little bit. So you have speed. And here you can determine the pitch of the notes. Very interesting synth, the CS30. I use it primarily to create bass sounds like I just played. So now now if I play the keyboard it doesn't work. So I have to switch this back to keyboard. It's a little convoluted. So that's usually how I use it, to create like a great bass line with it. So also this synthesizer I haven't retrofitted yet. I mentioned that in another episode, the Kenton retrofit, that allows it for you to program stuff in MIDI and then it comes in and then you can just program it. I really love the sequencer. It's very intuitive. And also the voltages, I will get to that in a different episode. The voltages are not quantized, which means that it doesn't automatically switch to the next automatic note on your keyboard. So it's also microtonal. You can get really weird harmonic things with it that are completely out of whack. Let me show you that quickly if I press play. So you can get really interesting riffs out of it. I think that's it for this keyboard. And like I said, I really love playing with this one. And it's also really great for really powerful leads. And the complicated way of routing these things into the filters and into the VCA makes it actually a very modern keyboard when it comes to what you can do with routing and internal modulation. But I'm going to get way more into that in our episode that is about modular synthesis, because that's when I can really show it. Like I said earlier on, I'm very unhappy that the CS60 is not here and the CS70M, but I'll promise I'll do a different episode on that. Thank you very much. See you next time.